Hello everyone, welcome back to another tutorial. So this one looks intimidatingly long, like it looks a lot longer than it should be for what I'm saying. But I'm going to go through as much as possible and as many different ways to do what we're doing today as I can think of. So to not waste your time, we're going to start with the simplest way to make a working radio in the source engine. And this should apply. I'm going to try and cover as many different versions as I can with this one. So yeah, I'll leave timestamps in the description for specific things. And also, I'm not an expert. I could get something wrong. Please check the comments. I'll pin, if somebody has information, I'll pin it. But anyway, how do you make a working radio? So first, let's get the radio down. And this tutorial assumes you can get your own custom sounds. If you've not watched a tutorial on custom sounds or soundscapes, I have a soundscape tutorial, and other people have made custom sounds for ambient generic, and we'll be using ambient generic today anyway. So you start with your static citizen radio, which means it's not going to move. And in fact, actually, I think this one is only made to be a physics prop. So I'm going to set it to dynamic override because I think there is no static for the citizen radio. But again, I'm in Gary's mod, so I don't know what it's like for other games. Anyway, we want our ambient generic. Ambient generic, put that down. Just put it in the middle of where the radio is. And then, yes, okay. And I'm going to have it loop. And I'm going to pick the song here. Okay. And again, I'm using Minecraft music for this specific tutorial. You can use, again, custom sounds. I'll link one in the description for custom sounds. But anyway, so we have chirp here, but we want it so that this is playing, and then you walk up to the radio and you can turn it off. So, this is automatically playing, and you want to be able to turn it on and off. So we're gonna make a button. And this is using a trigger brush. You could use any tool brush. We're going to have to tell the button to not render regardless. Tool brushes are basically the brushes that are used for functional things, and they're supposed to be invisible. You want to Control T while on the brush around the radio, and you want to change it to Func button. And then you have your button, and you want it to not move. Let's name our ambient sound. Let's call it radio music. There we go, radio music. And then let's have this be radio button. All right. And output. So on in radio music stop sound. And so on in when you push buttons in source engine games, they have an animation where they move back and forth. They're kind of like doors, actually. I think doors, Func door is actually very similar to how buttons move, and you could have a button move that plays a sound, but we're making an invisible one that make it look like you're interacting with the radio. So on in means it's in the pushed in position. And that's how you would have it so that it stays there. And in fact, we want it to delay before reset. We want to set that to -1 so that it doesn't move. And in fact, again, I toggled this so it doesn't move physically, but there's still some moving going. It's hard to explain, but it's still moving, just not visually. So yeah, this is so it stays. And then when the button is pushed in, the music is stopped because we set our music to play automatically. And then when the button is back out, which you would do by pushing it again, the music would start. I typed that wrong. Or play sound. It's play sound, isn't it? Yes. Alright. And then the last thing is, I'm pretty sure even though it's a trigger brush, it'll still render. So you want to set render mode to don't render. The button will still be there. It's just you won't physically see it. And there we go. There we have our radio working together. Quick and dirty radio. Let's give it a test. See if I did everything right. Okay, so I messed up and unchecked toggle. You want your button to be toggle, but yeah, now this radio can play sound and stop sound, and it just looks, it looks like a radio. And unfortunately, the song I picked, Chirp, takes a little bit longer to actually play. So you don't know if you're actually working. But you can't move this. Oh, you can move the button. In Gary's mod, there's a flag for fizz gun interaction. If you want this to not be grabbed by the fizz gun, you can turn that off. But anyway, we can't move this radio without the fizz gun, and then it just stays there. So what if you want this to be a prop, kind of like in Portal? I'm going to show you how to do that next. Alright, now we're moving on to a radio that you can pick up with the gravity gun and still toggle to mess with it. So, obviously now our radio is going to be the prop physics, but we're going to give it a name, and I'm going to call it movable radio. And obviously it's the same procedure, so I will actually change these names. And one small change that I'm going to make to the ambient generic here, after changing the name, is you can actually do a target prop or source entity name, meaning that, well, it has a little description here. So it'll come from whatever prop you attach it to, and in this case we want it to be our movable radio. So now it doesn't matter where this is. In fact, I could put this all the way in the corner and the sound will come from this radio right here. I'm actually going to make this button a little bigger so that we always can hit it when we want to. And for the button, we want to parent it to the radio itself, the movable radio. And everything about the button should be the same. We'll change all the outputs. And then that should work. Alright, so now we have our radio that can't move and our radio that can move. And as you can see, you can pick it up, toss it around, and still mess with the sound that it's playing if you hit it right. I think my button doesn't encompass the whole thing. But yeah, that's the basics of making radios that play one song in Gary's mod and source engines that include a use key. I'm going to move on to making a radio in a game that doesn't normally have a use key, one that you can activate by hitting it. So we will do that now. Alright, believe it or not, we are in TF2 even though the map looks the same, and the problem with TF2 and some other source engine games I'm sure I'm forgetting is you have no use key. TF2 you can bind one, and I think some custom servers and maps require you to bind a key to your use key, but if you're just making a fun little map, you don't want to have to bind something to use. And in my testing, buttons that toggle something on or off do not like the on damage way of doing it. So, how do we accomplish a radio that turns on and off with just hitting it. And the way I've figured out how to do it is using a variable. There might be a simpler way to do it. I'm no expert, but I think using a variable is probably what we want to do. Variables in Hammer are done using math counters and logic cases. So get yourself a math counter and a logic case. Alright, now just put these entities near the radio for convenience. So I'm going to name both of these. Okay. Alright, so first let's mess with our math counter. So the maximum legal value we want to have is 3. And the initial value is 0, and there's actually no flags in this entity, so that's all we want to do here. But make sure you get this output. There is an output that's out value to the logic case, and in value. So this reports the values to the logic case that the math counter is receiving. It's kind of a weird backwards way of doing it. I'm not really sure why variables are done this way in Source or in the Hammer editor. I'm sure VScript makes this really simple, but this is how you do it. Alright, and once you have it reporting to the logic case, we want to go back to our button. And then our output here is on damaged, math guy, add, and then a variable of 1. So this adds 1 to our variable. And so every time you hit this radio, this number stored in here goes up by 1. It's a little tricky to understand, but basically every time you hit that radio, the number goes up by 1. And so the logic case will read that first initial hit. Well, first, in the logic case, you have to define what variables is what case, which is kind of weird, but that first initial hit is going to be on case 1, and then we talk to our radio music and we play the music, and then on case 2, which is going to be our number 2, we go back and talk to our radio music again, and then we stop the music. And so that means you hit it once, it counts as 1 hit. You hit it again, it counts as 2. But we want that number to reset. So on hit max back in the math counter, we're going to talk to the math counter itself, and we're going to reset the value or set the value back to 0, and then that pattern can just go on forever. Again, this is a very roundabout way of doing it. If someone has a superior method in the comments, please let me know. But as far as I know, this is the best way to do it in the Hammer editor for Team Fortress and games where you can't use the use button. So we're going to give it a test here. Alright, so we are in. I can't move because it's pregame. There we go. So I hit it and it plays a sound, and I hit it and it stops the sound. I hit it again. Maybe I didn't hit it right. And it plays the sound again. So a little finicky, but it does accomplish a toggleable radio in Team Fortress 2. And in fact, if you want the radio to play a sound like you're hitting it like a button, you could do on damaged, and then play a separate sound attached to this radio. But for today's purposes, this is pretty good. Now the variables can actually be used to expand your radios into multiple songs. So we're going to go back to Gary's mod for that part. Alright, I now have everything set up in Gary's mod the same way it's set up in TF2. But we want to have this one radio play 3 different songs that you can cycle through. And there's a way to do that with the variables that I mentioned in the previous section. But I'm going to re-go over how they work in this section, just in case you had to skip it. So, when you have your button pressed, it adds 1 to the math counter. The math counter basically holds a number for the logic case to read, and that number is called a variable. In programming, it's a very common thing for like coding and stuff. I don't do any coding, so I don't know the full potential of its use, but I do know its use in this context. And my variable maximum legal value is set to 2, and then every time this button is used, it adds 1 to this number until it reaches 2, and when it does reach 2, it resets its value back to 0. So the outputs you want for this is after setting up the maximum legal value, you want the on-hit max to be set the value back to 0. And then this output here, out value, the name of your logic case, which I named case guy, and in value is just telling the engine that the logic case needs to read what is going on with the math counter. And we move on to the logic case, and it has 2 numbers set up here. So each case is a number that it is reading from the math counter, and I want it to read the number 1 and 2, and obviously you gotta name it. And so when the number reaches 1, it plays the sound, and when it reaches 2, it stops the sound. And that's how all of this works. It's a really roundabout way to do the radio toggling we did earlier, but now we want several different sounds. So I'm going to make more copies of my ambient generic, and I'm going to name them all different, slightly different from each other, and I'm going to change the music in each of them. I'm going to change this math counter's maximum legal value to 4, and I'm going to set up the numbers in the logic case. And then I'm going to set up my outputs that for each number, one of the songs is played and one of them is not played. So on case 2, we want the second song to actually start playing. And then on case 3, we want the second song to stop playing, and we want the third song to start playing. And then case 4, we want the third song to stop. And then there you go. That's your entire setup for 3 songs. So basically each number equals a song. And then when 4 is hit, it resets the value back to 0. And it should be radio silence, pun intended. Obviously, if you wanted all of these to originate from the radio, you could do the source entity name trick I showed when I was showing you how to make the radio a physics prop, and I imagine with this setup you still could do that, but things might get a little complicated. Right now I'm just gonna show you cycling through all these songs. Alright, so we are in the game, and as you can see, if I do this, it starts playing Chirp like before, but if I hit it again, it plays a different song. And if I hit it one more time, it plays the third song. and if I hit it a fourth time, it stops. And that's basically the entire setup. And it's all done from one little radio. So that's how you do radio, all the radio stuff I could think of in the Source engine. The variables are pretty powerful. You could do this with lights. You could do this with platforms. You could do it with all sorts of configurations, but I think the most common thing I could think of is with music playing from a radio. But thank you so much for watching. Hopefully this video helps you out, and if you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments, or the Hammer subreddit on Reddit is actually extremely helpful to newer people. That's how I learned a lot of what I am doing now. So and I'll link tutorials for related things in the description. But yeah, thank you all so much for watching. Drop a comment, leave a like, and I will see you guys in the next tutorial. Goodbye.